Welcome to this week's The Real Estate of Life with Kevin Riles. I have made mistakes. So this week, as we get ready to build wealth in 2018, this is True Confessions Week. I'm going to tell you about my biggest real estate mistake, not of a client, not of somebody that I've represented in commercial real estate or residential real estate, but my biggest mistake. This is True Confessions. So DJ, hit the music, please.
Support for this program comes from the Digital Broadcasting Network, presenting podcasts and web series from everyday people who have an extraordinary passion to make the world a better place.
And welcome back to The Real Estate of Life with Kevin Riles. This is your host, Kevin Riles. I am excited, again, as we get this new year started to our theme this year is to help you build wealth, not only in real estate, but in life. And so, because it's called The Real Estate of Life with Kevin Riles. And so this week is kind of a True Confessions week. We did a Facebook Live, kind of Instagram Live session last week, and I got a lot of good questions, and unfortunately didn't have time in the scope of that podcast to answer all of those questions. But one of the questions that stood out to me, someone asked, what was the biggest real estate mistake that you've made, and what would you do differently? And so what was the biggest mistake? And so, you know, when you're a real estate professional, and especially when you've been a successful real estate professional like myself, it's hard to kind of tell your dirty laundry, right? It's like I always tell people will tell you about their religion, they'll tell you about their credit scores, but if you ask them how much money they make, it's like, oh, wait a minute now, I don't know that. And so I want to tell you this story in hopes of you learning from my mistakes. There's a book by Tavis Smiley called Failing Forward. And so this experience, which really just ended not too long ago, it's actually about a 5.5 year journey of a mistake. And so I'm laid bare to you guys today. So the story goes a little bit like this. Sound like at the beginning of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But I, back in 2005, decided that I had a single family investment property in Missouri City. Property was doing well, and 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage property. I was leasing it out. I was making about $300 a month between the mortgage and that property. I purchased it. But I want to, as you guys know, I'm uber interested in multifamily. I sell now apartment complexes. That's my specialty. But I've always been interested in multifamily. My first house, if you go back to the very first podcast, I told you my story. My very first house that I bought was a duplex. I lived in one side, I rented out the other. So I've always been interested in multifamily. So I decided that I wanted to purchase a multifamily property. I wanted a fourplex. That's specifically what I wanted. And so I was going to sell my single family property and buy a multifamily property. So sounds very easy. I've done it for clients many a time. Even at that time, I had done it for clients at many times. And so I put up that property for sale. I bought that property for about $60,000. I sold it for around $85,000. So I made about $20K. Actually a little bit more than $20K. And I was doing what's called a 1031 exchange. And a 1031 exchange, from some of the previous podcasts, is where you basically put that money that you make into an account and you hold that money and you reinvest that money into another property so that you don't have to pay Uncle Sam a capital gains tax. And so I looked around inside the loop here in Houston that was going through a resurgence as far as property values. I've always had a fascination with Galveston Island, something about the water. So I was looking on our multiple listing service and saw this fourplex that had been renovated in Galveston on the Strand. Right. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Strand is kind of like our Bourbon Street in Galveston. And so I drove down to Galveston, about a 50-minute ride. Hence begins the lesson, my friends. I believe when you first start doing real estate investment that your first property should be within what I would say a reasonable amount of distance from you. So I think reasonable is anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. If it's over 30 minutes away, it's something that you really need to consider. So that's lesson number one, is your property should be close to you. The mentor that got me started in real estate before I even knew that I would get licensed always believed that you should be able to drive and go see your property relatively quickly, so that if anything happened, you could get there quickly and you could also drive by it once you had it rented out. So lesson number one, 30 minutes or below. So drove down, saw this property in Galveston. It was on the Strand. I fell in love with like being able to say, oh man, it's the Strand. It was on the Strand, and it was one block from UTMB, the University of Texas Medical Branch, which is a medical school. It was right next to a kind of a neighborhood bar. And it was a it was a single family house that these guys had moved into and slowly but surely renovated into a 4-unit apartment complex, 4 1-bedroom, 1 bath. I fell in love with it, which is lesson number 2. Don't fall in love with a property, right? Fall in love with the money that it's going to make after you look at the numbers, but don't fall in love with the property. It was a beautiful property, kind of a classic New Orleans style, plantation style home with balconies. I mean, just had a lot of character. Was originally built in the 1920s. I fell in love with the property. So I went and got my wife, drove her down there. She liked it. It was, nice as well. And so I made an offer on the property. So number 3, doctors are their own worst patients. Real estate brokers are their own worst evaluators. Property was it was overpriced at the time, but I fell in love with the fact that it was renovated. I wouldn't have to do anything. I could lease it out immediately, and it was right across from UTMB. I made an offer, went back and forth, got a contract, was able to get 95% financing on an investment property. Now remember the time, 2005. This is right before the mortgage debacle. Right before you used to you could be breathing and get a mortgage. Now on an investment property, you have to put 20% or 25% down. I only had to put 5% down. I had the 5% because I just sold my single family. So I basically got into the property for nothing. So I bought it and furnished it with IKEA furniture. Went to IKEA, bought furniture. I was going to provide furnished apartments for UTMB employees and medical students. Furnished apartments for UTMB apartments for employees and for medical students. So furnished them, got Wi-Fi. I also bought a washer and a dryer, coin-operated washer and dryer. So lesson number 3, don't over-improve a property, right? Should have never done that because that wasn't the market that I was in. And a part of that lesson is also study the market. Yes, I was close to UTMB, but I had our research to find out that most people that go to UTMB actually live off the island. They don't live on the island. And if they do live on the island, they're living in kind of the historic district, which I was in, but a little further in. But again, I fell in love with the property, right? So number 3, do your research. And so anyway, first couple of months that I owned it, never could get it all the way full. I could never get 4 tenants at the same time. I would have 2, I'd have 3, I'll go back down to 1. Had a couple of people walk out on me. I was trying to manage the property from Missouri City, Texas, which is again about a 50-minute ride. That was not working. Every time someone wanted to see the property, I would have to drive all the way down there. Sometimes they wouldn't show up. So then I decided, you know what, this is stupid. I'm going to hire a property manager. So I hired a property manager. Rule number 5, I'm on 5 or 4, I can't remember. It's another rule, just whatever, is always do research on property managers before you hire them, because they are essentially acting as you, as the owner of the property, even though they're not. And you want a property manager that is going to treat a property as much as they possibly can like you would. And no property manager probably can do that ultimately, but you want to be able to make sure. So then I hire a property manager. They start managing the property. They're going to get it leased up. Oh, no problem. This is a beautiful property. They get it leased up, but they get it leased up with folks that are damaging the property. They're charging me left and right. I go back and forth with them for about a year and a half when finally they say the property's not making money and they're billing me every month. We go into litigation, almost go into litigation over bills. Fire them. I hire another property manager. They do the same thing. And so now I'm 2 years into this where I've never had it full. I'm paying $200,000. And by the way, I paid like $220,000 for the fourplex, which back then was just, I mean, it's just stupid. There's no other way to say it. But again, I fell in love with the property. So long story short, I'm struggling along. I decide to start managing again. I'm going back and forth. And then this thing called Hurricane Ike hits Galveston, right? So I skipped a lot of going back and forth. Hurricane Ike hits Galveston. And what I learned about hurricanes and Galveston is that the seawall is a good thing. Galveston Island, for those of you that listen outside of Texas, has a seawall that basically prevents surge from coming onto the island. When a tropical storm or hurricane happens, when the water rises, the seawall basically acts as the edge of the tub so that the water won't come into the city. Well, the Strand is not protected by a seawall. It is actually on the other side, right next to the harbor where the cruise ships come in and the other ships that come in. So there's no protection. So to give you an example, Hurricane Ike hits Galveston so bad that it literally looks like the end of the earth. And I'm not exaggerating. If you've ever seen Apocalypse Now or any end of the world movie, Mad Max, it literally looked like that once they let us back on the island. So the surge for Hurricane Ike, the sea surge, was about 22 feet from what I understand. My property sits 3 feet off the ground. And remember, this property was built in 1920, so it had survived a lot of hurricanes. My property sits about 3 feet off the ground. And when I finally was able to get back on the island, they finally let us on the island. And by the way, getting back on the island, going over the causeway onto the island, there were boats in the middle of Broadway, the main street. There were animals. I mean, it's just, I can't, I wish I had. That was the time where we were taking a whole lot of pictures and selfies and things of that nature, so I could have taken pictures. But I've never seen anything like it since then. I finally get to my property, and I walk in. The first floor has very high ceilings, and the water line, the contractor, when they cut it out, they cut the water line where the water stopped at 17 feet in my property, which means that the surge was actually 20 feet because my property sat 3 feet off the ground. So let's just say that the whole bottom part of my property had to be gutted. Luckily, I had insurance. I had flood insurance. My other insurance didn't take. And so filed a flood insurance claim, went into forbearance with my mortgage because I didn't have any income coming in because of Hurricane Ike, not only in my business, but also for leasing out the property. Found a contractor down there. Luckily, he was an honest guy. He got me renovated back up and running. I refurnished them again. And then I said, okay, let's lease them out. Well, the problem with Hurricane Ike is it literally devastated Galveston to the point where nobody was on the island. Nobody was on the island. When I say nobody, I mean nobody was on the island. And if they were on the island, they weren't capable of paying rent. And so I sat and I sat and I sat to the point where my forbearance period with the bank ended, and therefore it was time to start paying. I made payments with no tenants, about $2,300 a month for about a good year and a half. And then finally, I had to come to the conclusion that I could no longer afford this property. So I stopped paying my mortgage. This is the part that throws me off about telling people, because I have until then had perfect credit, and since then I have perfect credit. But I stopped paying my mortgage. I tried to do a short sale or a foreclosure, a deed in lieu of, which I can discuss on another podcast, and didn't get any takers. Then they allowed for another forbearance period, so I took the forbearance period, again, trying to get it rented out, Then my insurance expired, my property insurance expired. I re-upped my property insurance, and they send the inspector to go out, and I have a flat roof, and the flat roof needs to be replaced, which is $30,000, and I cannot replace the flat roof. So then they force place, Mr. Producer is finding this funny, but I'm bearing my guts, Mr. Producer. They force place, the bank, because they want their asset protected, force places insurance on me, and therefore my note goes from like $2,100. I'm sorry, they had allowed my note to be $1,700. They went down on my note during the negotiation when I fell behind, from $1,700 to like $2,700 a month. So it was higher than it was when I purchased the property. And so just imagine, I'm already behind, I'm already struggling, can't get insurance, and I'm still throwing money at it. I'm still throwing money at it. I'm still throwing money. So I'm taking money out of my pocket. It's my fault. I'm not blaming anybody, and I'm throwing money at it. So long story short, I just finally told the bank, hey, you know what? I just can't do it anymore. And so I told them I could no longer pay for it and to go ahead and foreclose. That was one of the hardest decisions I made in my life because, again, I pride myself on being honorable and paying my bills. And up until that point, I had almost 800 credit scores. Credit scores obviously tanked from being behind, wasn't behind on anything else. The property goes into foreclosure, but for whatever reason, this particular lender, who will remain nameless because I've had so many issues with them, our servicer specifically, just would not foreclose. Usually in Texas, after 3 months, they issue a foreclosure notice, and then within 2 to 3 months, you're usually foreclosed on and it's gone, right? We're a non-judicial foreclosure state. But they just kept hitting me every month with late pays, and I'm saying, please foreclose on it. Here, do you want the deed? I'll sign it over to you. And they never would respond. So 2 years later, after all this starts, in April of that year, they finally foreclose. And I say, hallelujah, I can finally start my life over again. They foreclose on it. I think it's done. In credit terms, once you have a foreclosure, you basically have to wait 7 years to purchase another property. So I knew that I would have to wait 7 years for me to be on the loan. My wife could purchase a property, but I could not. She wasn't on the original loan. And so I just thought, hey, my 7-year time starts. Well, 3 years later, I get a call from this servicer saying, hey, you owe us $63,000 and some change in back payments on your property down in Galveston. No, I don't. No, yes, you do. You foreclosed on me. No, we didn't. Yes, we did. Yes, you did. I know I got served. Trust me, you foreclosed on me. No, sir, we did not. We want our money. And they started calling me. So finally I asked for the proverbial, let me talk to a supervisor. Talk to the supervisor. Well, sir, you're going to have to prove to us that we foreclosed on you. Now, I want that to ring for a second, just in case you're in the car. The lender wanted me to prove to them that they had foreclosed on me. That's called a pregnant pause, so you could think about what I just said. That doesn't make any sense. But I talked to Natasha Gransberry, who I featured on the show before, my real estate attorney, and she said, well, hey, prove it to him. So I found the foreclosure deed in the county records, just because they're public records, just like anybody else. I sent them the foreclosure deed, and they were still calling me. Every time they call me and I could take a call, I would tell them, hey, you foreclosed on me. No, we didn't. Yes, you did. I just look at your notes, Mr. Person that's working customer service. Oh, okay, yeah, we'll get back with you. Okay, I'm on an auto dial. Long story short, finally someone calls me and says, hey, sir, we rescinded the foreclosure. Oh, you rescinded the foreclosure? Yeah. When did you rescind the foreclosure? Oh, we rescinded it 2 years later. So they foreclosed on me. Foreclosure was filed, which is supposed to be. Then they said that they rescinded the foreclosure 1.5 years to 2 years later, but I was never notified of of rescinding the foreclosure. So that they had to, and so that's why they were calling me and saying I still owed. And I said, no, I don't. So finally I had to threaten legal action, got their attention, sent all the documentation to a special number that they gave me, and they basically reinstated the original foreclosure. So that went from 2005. It is actually 2018 now. I just finished that last year in 2016, right? It's 11 years. 11 years. So the movie 12 Years a Slave, right? It's 11 years of trouble, right? 11 years. So you want to know my biggest real estate mistake? It was not doing my due diligence. It was falling in love with a property. It was hiring the wrong people. It was being smarter than everyone else and not talking to other folks that had done this before. And it was purchasing a property that I couldn't readily go check on. So don't do what I did. And there's way more to this story. I had a second on a second loan on the property when I first bought it. Ended up having to negotiate with them, and that was like a credit card. I ended up having negotiate a settlement with them. That happened in the middle of that. I can't tell you how many times property got broken into, property got vandalized while I was going through all of this. Just all kinds of craziness, calling the police, the whole nine. So I only had 30 minutes for this podcast. This could be like a 5-part OJ episode podcast on this particular property. So as you think about building wealth, I'm not saying don't be cautious. I'm sorry. I'm not saying don't move forward. What I'm saying is move cautiously forward, but move forward on looking for real estate property and looking for deals and getting into deals. They say you should never say, if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't do that, obviously, but it taught me so much. Like, I've helped so many people in different stages of a mistake that they've made because of the mistake that I've made. So that has been my payback, is that I've been able to help people in foreclosure situations. I've been able to help. And this is the guy that became known in real estate for selling foreclosures. Get the irony of that, right? So I would go out and tell people, hey, I'm gonna give you cash for keys. The bank is telling you to get out. Hey, that's why I always, and I didn't know this at the time, I always was respectful of the people that I would have to go out and when I represented the bank to sell their property, because I never knew when I would be on the other side of that knock. And I eventually became, on the other side of that knock. So with that being said, just move. Let my mistake be a lesson for you as you get ready to build wealth in 2018, that do your due diligence, hire a professional. I should have, at the stage of real estate that I was in at that time for my career, hired another agent to help me, an investor agent, or got an investor, my mentor at the time, to hey man, look at this deal for me. And he probably would have been like, man, what you doing? No, don't do this, right? But no, I was smarter than the average cookie, and the cookie got. Right. So that's this week's The Real Estate of Life with Kevin Riles. Learn from my mistakes. Don't do it, or do it slowly, or hire me, or call somebody to look at a deal before you decide to just throw money away. And by the way, I lost all that money, plus had to pay taxes on the gain for losing the property, because they were able to sell the property at auction for more than what I owed at the time. So that's another tax lesson. But anyway, all right. Look, I can't even finish right, Mr. Producer. I just bringing up stories is making me feel bad. Anyway, you guys, I enjoy this as always. I will see you next week on The Real Estate of Life with Kevin Riles. Hey, thanks for listening as always. Do you have questions about any of the topics I'm talking about? If you have questions, let me know. Email me at kevin@kevinriles.com. Again, that's kevin@kevinriles.com. I'm going to do a podcast just on the questions that you guys are sending me. So feel free to send them to me. Again, that's kevin@kevinriles.com.